Ultimately, Jeffery Lurie, the Philadelphia Eagles owner, deserves the most credit for the biggest move that led to the Eagles' second world title. I'll tell you why coming up on this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. It's a Monday edition of the show, and it is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. There are so many people that deserve credit for the Philadelphia Eagles' second Super Bowl win in 8 years. Super Bowl 59, a blowout win over the Kansas City Chiefs. Jalen Hurts, Howie Roseman, Saquon Barkley, Nick Sirianni, Jalen Carter. The list goes on and on, from the assistant coaches to the role players. This was a complete effort. It was the most dominant, best Eagles team in franchise history, and that is why they took down the beast, the dragon, the dynasty, Pat Mahomes, Andy Reid, and the Kansas City Chiefs. But you know who actually has not gotten enough credit? It's the guy all the way at the top. It's Jeffery Lurie. And Jeffery Lurie deserves the most credit for the biggest move the Eagles made that led to this second championship, drafting Jalen Hurts in 2020, which was one of the most controversial, dramatic, just seismic moves that completely altered the franchise, eventually for the better. But for a while, it was unknown where this path was going, but we knew it had changed things forever. And you guys know on Locked On Eagles, if you heard my podcast in 2020, in 2021, I was not a fan of that move because I believed in Carson Wentz. I thought drafting Jalen Hurts could regress Carson and all the progress he made in 2019, and that's exactly what happened. And I just thought, when you made the investment you did in Carson, over $100 million contract extension, why are you going to pull the rug out from underneath your own quarterback? And that's why I've proceeded with caution when it comes to giving Howie Roseman credit for Jalen Hurts' success. Like, I will give Howie credit that he has built around Jalen tremendously. Like, he has learned from his mistakes that he made with Carson, just failing to build around him. I mean, there's not many quarterbacks in NFL history that have had, this might be the best support system a quarterback's ever had. You could make the argument that Jalen Hurts has that with the elite offensive line that he has, with Saquon Barkley, the best running back season of all time in 2024, maybe the best wide receiver duo a team has ever had, and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and then you throw in Dallas Goedert and the number one ranked defense this year. Like, Jalen has the support system. Like, he has it. So Howie deserves a lot of credit for that. But why I don't always go all in on saying, like, Howie was a visionary, like he saw all this coming, is because he didn't. The original vision was for Jalen Hurts to be Nick Foles 2.0. They didn't know if Carson Wentz was going to be able to stay healthy year after year. He never finished a playoff game for them in his time with Philadelphia. He wanted a high-end backup quarterback that could help you win a championship if Carson goes down. Like, that is why he said they wanted to be a quarterback factory. He almost traded for Russell Wilson in 2021 after the season, the 2022 offseason, I should say. He almost traded for Deshaun Watson. He looked into trading up for Zach Wilson, believe it or not. Like, there's a lot of luck to the team that Howie Roseman built. He deserves a ton of credit for the historic job he's done over the last few years. Like, most of it is his doing of how this team looks. But the Jalen Hurts part of this all, like, Howie, I think, had a different idea behind all of this. But Jeffery Lurie, I do give him full credit for seeing this future. I truly believe in Jeffery Lurie's mind, Jalen Hurts was his second chance. It was his second chance to get back what he lost in 2012 when they just missed out on Russell Wilson in the NFL draft in the third round. Like, they were set on taking Russell Wilson in the third round, and they thought he could be their next franchise quarterback. And that scar of missing out on Russ in 2012, like, that always haunted Jeffery Lurie. And it's a reason I think that he saw the special in Jalen Hurts. And that's why he was behind this the whole way. Like, I truly do think, like, for Howie, I think Jalen Hurts was supposed to be a long-term backup. And he wasn't sure who Jalen Hurts was going to be long term. And that's why in 2022, he explored a lot of other options in the form of Russell Wilson, in the form of Deshaun Watson, in the form of Zach Wilson, in the form of bringing Carson Wentz back. But Jeffery Lurie truly, I believe, thought this was Russell Wilson 2.0. This was his shot at redemption 8 years later. And even though, like I said, logically, even for Jeffery Lurie's mindset, it felt a little counterproductive drafting a quarterback this high when you knew it could negatively impact your $100 million man that you supposedly believe in. But I got to give Lurie credit because I truly think he thought, I can't do this again where I potentially miss out on an all-time great, even if he did believe in Carson. Look, if this was coming off the 2017 season, I don't think Jeffery Lurie feels this way, and I don't think he's still hell-bent on trying to find his next Russell Wilson. I'm sure he believed in Carson still after the 2019 season, but it wasn't to the level of 2017, which allowed for those thoughts to creep back in to say, hey, yeah, Carson was good this year, but maybe this kid's going to be great. I truly don't think Howie had that thought process, and I think Lurie was in on the backup idea, but in the back of his head, he was thinking, this could be Russ 2.0. Like, I think Jeffery Lurie does deserve a lot of credit for that, and that scar of missing out on Wilson in 2012, it's kind of crazy. It actually helped you win both of your championships. Because if you draft Russell Wilson, you know who you did, who knows what kind of success you have with Russ. Who knows if Andy Reid stays? Like, there's a whole nother universe, a whole nother what-if episode we could do with that. We've actually done it before on Locked On Eagles, so you can actually check that out on YouTube or wherever you're listening. But if you don't draft Russell Wilson, or if you do, you're not ever taking Nick Foles. That was your consolation prize that year, and Nick Foles doesn't come to Philadelphia, come back in 2017 if he wasn't drafted in Philly in the first place. And then when Carson Wentz goes down, you don't win that championship. So you didn't get Russell Wilson, so therefore you got Nick Foles, and therefore you got your first championship. And you didn't get Russell Wilson, which made Jeffery Lurie want to try again for that player on day 2. And that's what led to Jalen Hurts, who won you your second Super Bowl. So it's kind of it's a crazy, like, connect the dots kind of X-Files, like Twilight Zone type of thing, where missing out on Russell Wilson helped you win 2 Lombardi trophies. And even wilder than that is not getting Russell Wilson in 2022. Russell Wilson deciding I'm not going to waive my no-trade clause to come to Philadelphia, that saved the Lombardi too. That guy that Lurie wanted for years was finally available, and Philly was interested. But Russ saying he didn't want to come to Philadelphia led you to get the new version of him. Like, isn't that cool? I don't know. I love sports for these reasons. Like, that is just such a neat connect the dots kind of moment. And I do think Jeffery Lurie deserves, like, I was thinking about that. Obviously, Jalen Hurts drafting him was the biggest move that propelled you into the golden era of Eagles football, even if at the time it seemed crazy. And I still to this day say at the time in a vacuum, that was a crazy decision. But it did lead you to this golden era. It led you to a championship. And Jeffery Lurie is the one that did envision this kind of future more than anyone. Howie Roseman, I'm sure, saw the upside in Jalen. Of course he did. Jalen Hurts was seen as a 3rd, 4th round prospect when it comes to, like, consensus opinions across the league. Howie thought higher of him than most did, and that's why they took him with the 53rd pick in the 2nd round. Jeffery Lurie, though, I think had an even higher opinion of Jalen because of his infatuation with Russell Wilson and what he wasn't able to accomplish in 2012. And 13 years later, that moment, that day of missing out on a player helped you win a championship because you got to try again. And I think Jeffery Lurie, like, that's my take of the day. Jeffery Lurie deserves the most credit for drafting Jalen Hurts because I do think he thought Jalen could be a star. Howie, I'm not so sure because Howie tried other things. Like, Jalen Hurts was not plan A. I don't even know if he was plan B or C. It worked out. And you need that luck sometimes in the NFL. But Jeffery Lurie did see this, and I think the owner deserves a lot of credit for that, and I think that's why he deserved to hold the Lombardi Trophy more first before anybody else did. So I just thought that was interesting, and yeah, not getting Russell Wilson helped you win 2 Lombardis because you don't get Nick Foles if you draft Russell Wilson, and you don't draft Jalen Hurts if none of that happens. So interesting little what-if to start the Locked On Eagles podcast. Coming up next, And this list was hard to do because there were so many players that helped contribute to the Super Bowl win. But coming up next, I'm going to rank the top playoff performers of 2024 for the Philadelphia Eagles, 1 through 10. We'll start with the first 5 coming up right here on Locked On Eagles. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, like Steph Curry is the obvious one, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, I'm going to try my best to rank the top 10 playoff performers for the Philadelphia Eagles in their 2024 Super Bowl season. It was tough. It was tough keeping some guys off the list, and this list made me think about just how many guys were great in this run. And it can go deep into the roster, like Oren Burks and Tyler Steen. Isaiah Rodgers made so many big plays in the playoffs this year. Jake Elliott just overcoming his struggles all year long, including in the playoffs, and being so clutch in the Super Bowl. I mean, the list goes on and on. Even Nakobe Dean in that Green Bay game, Will Shipley making plays, Jahan Dotson. I mean, everybody. Jordan Davis had 2 sacks in the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl combined. Everybody played their best ball when it mattered most. And that's why I think this is the most complete team the Eagles have ever had. The most top-heavy, star-powered team, but also the deepest team that Howie Roseman and any Eagles general manager has ever put together. But who are the top 10 playoff performers? Let's start 1 through 5. Number 1, it's Jalen Hurts. And I think this one you could go back and forth with number 1 and number 2. Number 2 is Saquon Barkley. Number 3, I have Jalen Carter. Number 4, the entire offensive line. And then number 5, Zach Bond. I think Jalen's obvious at number 1, even though Saquon had over 100 yards in 3 of your 4 playoff games, had 200 yards in the LA game, was clutch in the fourth quarter of all those games, especially Green Bay and the LA matchup. Explosive touchdowns every single week. In the Super Bowl, he only had 57 rushing yards, but he had 6 catches in that game. Like, he gave you receiving production in the Super Bowl. He gave you leadership. Like, he gave you everything. And he broke the all-time rushing record when you combine the regular season and the playoffs this year. So it's more 1A, 1B, and I probably should have put that on the graphic, right? You could make the argument it is Saquon. I think most of you would say it's Saquon. But for me, Jalen Hurts was the main reason you won the 2 biggest games of the playoffs, the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. He saved his 2 best games of the year for the 2 best moments, like the 2 biggest moments, I should say. He's going to go down as one of the best big game quarterbacks the NFL has ever seen. I mean, he was lethal in the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. And I said it, that there was going to be a moment where Jalen Hurts had to be special, where a team was finally going to hold Saquon or the game's back and forth. Something's going to happen where he has to throw the ball to win the game. And sure enough, it did happen in the Super Bowl where the Chiefs, they did it. They neutralized Saquon. He was averaging under 3 yards a carry in the biggest game of the year. They were daring Jalen Hurts to throw the ball to win the Super Bowl, to win the championship, and he did it. He carved Kansas City up. He carved Washington up. And I thought he made some clutch plays in the Green Bay matchup as well. In LA, battling through the injuries, in the blizzard, battling through the injuries, the fourth quarter completion to A.J. Brown, the 40-yard rushing touchdown in the first quarter. Jalen Hurts, you got to put him number 1, at least in my opinion. And then Saquon's a close number 2. You could say it's 1A, 1B. And then Jalen Carter, as you heard, he's number 3 for me. Like, this whole run doesn't happen without Jalen Carter. They lose that game against the Rams in the divisional round if Jalen Carter does not get that sack on the final drive. The Rams have you backed up inside the 20. Jalen Carter gets that sack to force the 3rd and long, then the 4th down forcing completion. Without that, the season was on the line, and Jalen Carter made the biggest play. And I think everyone was able to eat all playoff long on the defensive line because all of the attention was going to Jalen Carter, and yet he still dominated, especially that LA game, but the entire playoff. Jalen Carter was in the quarterback's face. I got to put him number 3 because, again, this whole run, it doesn't happen without number 98. And then number 4 is the entire offensive line. It was hard to pick out just one guy. This offensive line put on a complete clinic. Jalen Hurts was protected the entire postseason run. Saquon Barkley, again, he put up over 100 rushing yards in 3 of the 4 playoff games. So the run blocking was amazing. They were tough. Landon Dickerson's playing center, battling through injuries, and he finally goes down. Cam Jurgens is a bad back. He comes into the game. Tyler Steen, even when he's got to come in a couple games in a few spots, held his own. This offensive line is talented. They're tough. They're deep. And, it's hard to quantify what the offensive line does unless you watch the tape, right? But you got to give them credit because nothing happens without that offensive line in the playoffs. They picked up, I think, the pressure that Spagnuolo was giving Jalen Hurts in Super Bowl 59 really well eventually. It took a little bit, but I thought they settled in. The offensive line, nothing happens without Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson. It was so cool watching that one block against the Chiefs where Landon's just destroying a block. He spin moves into the other defensive lineman, throws him into the ground. Just an absolute clinic. And those guys are the biggest leaders of the team, both physically and metaphorically. And I had to put the offensive line in the top 5. And then number 5, Zach Bond, for so many reasons. Just first off, the playmaking. Has an interception in the Green Bay game, a fumble recovery in the LA game, has a forced fumble in the Washington game, and then another interception in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. So 4 impact plays in all 4 games. Nakobe Dean goes down, so Zach Bond has to be the green dot play caller. Just didn't miss any tackles, was stout in the run game. Zach Bond he's the backbone of that defense for a reason. And just the impact plays he made in the postseason all year, or I should say all year, but in the playoffs, all postseason long, and you lose your running mate, Nakobe Dean, and you don't skip a beat with Oren Burks, so much of that should go to Zach Bond. So that's my top 5 playoff performers for the Eagles in 2024. Number 1, Jalen Hurts. Number 2, Saquon Barkley. Maybe more 1A, 1B. Number 3, Jalen Carter. Number 4, the entire offensive line. And then number 5, Zach Bond. I'll go through 6 through 10 coming up next as we wrap up this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles. All right, we are ranking our top 10 playoff performers of the 2024 Super Bowl run for the Philadelphia Eagles right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Real quick again, 1 through 5 was Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, Jalen Carter, the entire offensive line, cheating a little bit there, but I don't know how you pick out just one guy there. And then number 5 was Zach Bond. Those were the 5 biggest impact players and one whole unit that helped you win a Super Bowl. But again, this was an entire team effort. 6 through 10 was a lot more difficult, but here's what I came up with. Number 6, Nolan Smith. Number 7, I combined 2 corners, the rookies, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Number 8, Devontae Smith. Number 9, Dallas Goedert. And then number 10, Josh Sweat. And again, this was tough. There were some guys that I had to leave off, like A.J. Brown. It feels weird leaving off your all-pro wide receiver who made some big plays in the playoffs, but I thought Devontae and Goddard were more impactful throughout the playoffs in its entirety because of AJ's injury that he was dealing with. You could say Chauncey Gardner-Johnson belongs in here. You could say Darius Slay as well, made some big-time plays, like the forcing completion on 4th down against L.A., the interception against Green Bay. Darius Slay was equally as good as anybody in this run. So there's a lot of players that, you could say deserve to be on the list, and they were left off. But I think that's the right 6 through 10. Nolan Smith at number 6 because, he was the most consistent pass rusher on the edge. He actually broke the Eagles' single playoff record for sacks. He had 4 sacks in the playoffs. No Eagle has had more in a single run. The full breakout for Nolan Smith came in the playoffs. I thought you saw it all year long after the bye week, but Nolan in the postseason was on another level. And I kept thinking to myself, Hassan Reddick was that guy in 2022 that when the game's on the line or it's a 3rd and long against a really good quarterback, who's going to make that play? The play. Who's going to get to the quarterback? For a while, we thought it's Brandon Graham or Fletcher Cox. Then we thought it was Hassan Reddick. This year, I was wondering, who's that go-to guy on the defensive line? We learned, of course, it's Jalen Carter, but Nolan Smith, he was that guy too. He was the most consistent player on the defensive line when it comes to sacks. 4 sacks in the postseason. Again, that's an Eagles record for a single playoff run. So Nolan Smith was number 6. Number 7, I did combine the 2 rookies, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, because they both were so elite in the playoffs, and I didn't know who to put individually, ahead of the other. So I just said they're both number 7. I mean, these guys, it's for a rookie corner to completely shut down an entire playoff is so incredibly impressive. It is so hard to play corner in the NFL, especially as a rookie, especially in the playoffs. For you to have not 1, but 2 of these guys have statistically a historic playoff run. When it comes to just locking down the opposing offense, it's unbelievable. Quinyon Mitchell, after the playoffs, and Cooper DeJean, they actually, according to Pro Football Focus, when you combine the regular season and the postseason, they combined had the 2 highest man coverage grades all season. All season, those are your top 2. It's the 2 Eagles rookie corners. They had 3 playoff interceptions combined. We know about Cooper DeJean's pick 6 in the Super Bowl, which was the play that really, I think, showed us they're going to win this championship. Quinyon Mitchell had 2 game-sealing interceptions against the Packers, against the Commanders. They both combined allowed below a 50 passer rating all playoff long against the opposing quarterbacks. Quinyon Mitchell specifically, the opposing passer rating when targeting 27, 33.3. Unreal. Quinyon Mitchell didn't allow more than 2 catches in a playoff game all year. Cooper DeJean tackled so well in the postseason. So did Q. That hit stick he had in the back of the end zone of the Super Bowl off the screen pass, ridiculous. I mean, these 2, the fact that they're rookies is unbelievable. I can't stop smiling that they got both. I was just happy they were going to get 1. When they drafted Quinyon Mitchell, I was good. I didn't care what they did the rest of the draft. The fact that they drafted another one in the 2nd round and he panned out just as well. PFF finished their season with Cooper DeJean as the highest graded cornerback in the NFL when you combine the regular season and the playoffs. And that was your 2nd pick. These 2 just do not get beat. They are fast. They are strong. They are confident. They're mature. They're technically sound. They're great tacklers. They're smart. I mean, they're everything. They're everything that you wanted. And they just completely shut down. An offense could not do anything against these guys. And Darius Slay's not even on this list, and he had a great playoff too. When you can just completely erase a team's ability to pull off explosive plays because of the way you cover and the way you tackle, it makes you almost impossible to be stopped. How do you beat a team where you cannot get explosive plays on them? I don't know. I don't know how you do it. And 2 of the biggest reasons you just cannot get over the top of this defense are Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. So I had to put them at number 7. Number 8, 9, and 10, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and Josh Sweat. Devontae, number 8, it's obvious. He's your most consistent pass catcher of all time in the playoffs. And that's why he has the most receiving yards for the Eagles in the playoffs of all time. Was your leading receiver yet again in the Super Bowl. Had the dagger in the Super Bowl with that touchdown in the 3rd quarter. That's when you knew it was over. Nick Sirianni said it in the mic'd up segment. If we score, it's over. Devontae Smith was the guy that got it done. How many 3rd down conversions and big moments did he make in this playoff? He was your most reliable receiver yet again in the postseason, and you got to put him down at number 8. He's going to go down as one of the him and Jalen Hurts, actually. You can combine both. They're going to go down as 2 of the best big-time, big game players in football history. And I want to say football, not the NFL, because you got to combine college in there as well. Devontae Smith had the game-winning touchdown in the national championship in 2018. He had over 100, almost like 200 yards receiving in the first half against Ohio State in the national championship in his Heisman year, and they won the national title that year too. He's led the Eagles in receiving every single playoff run in both Super Bowls. I mean, this guy, and he's only, 26 years old? You got to give Devontae Smith his flowers. Like, he's going to go down as one of the most clutch players, regardless of position, that football has ever seen. And then Dallas Goedert at number 9. And I almost put him ahead of Devontae because Dallas was actually the most consistent part of the Eagles' passing game all playoff long. Like, yeah, they really got going in the NFC title, in the Super Bowl, and A.J. Brown started to eat, Devontae Smith started to eat more. But in that Packers game, in that Rams game, when Jalen looked a little shaky, the passing game looked really conservative, the passing concepts Kellen Moore were drawing up just looked lazy and just too slow to open up and develop, and it didn't look good. Dallas Goedert was the one guy that was creating explosive plays through the air, run after the catch ability. I mean, that stiff arm touchdown he had against Green Bay was unbelievable. The one-handed catch he had on third down the following drive, which was, to me, the game-winning drive as Jake Elliott kicks a field goal to go up 9. He made a couple big-time conversions in the second half of that Rams game, too. I remember that play over the middle. Jalen Hurts finds him in the snow. I mean, Dallas Goedert made some incredible plays, and he was a great blocker all playoff long, too, to help Saquon Barkley break loose some of those explosive runs. Like, Dallas Goedert, it's, again, so frustrating how injured he is all the time, but it's so frustrating because we know how good of a player he is when he's out there, and the playoffs confirm that. And although it was annoying that he was hurt all year again, thank God he came back when he did, and he was healthy for the entire playoff run. Like, I'll take that. Whatever. If you're going to keep getting hurt like this, but you're that elite in the playoffs, and Dallas is like that all the time. Him and Devontae are the two, actually, statistically, the two best playoff performers the Eagles have in their history when it comes to pass catchers. Just statistically, I don't know. I know Smith now leads the team all time in receiving yards in the playoffs. I think Goddard might have receptions. I don't know. I know they keep taking turns basically, like Cox and Graham used to on the all-time sack list. But I digress. I think if that's what you're going to get from Dallas, you're going to get 11 to 12 really good games in the regular season, but then he's ready to go in time for the playoffs, and he's elite like that, like he was this year, I'll take it. I'll pay him again. Like, that was an incredible playoff run from Dallas Goedert. That was worth it, and it was cool to see him get his ring, right? Because Zach Ertz got his, Goddard comes in right after. I'm just really happy for that entire 2018 class. I always think it's got to be tough getting drafted by the team that won the Super Bowl, and because you're following that, they just won the championship, and so you're a part of the whole next year of celebration as the defending champ, but you can't really enjoy it because you weren't a part of it, right? And I always feel for those players, and I'm like, I want them to get their ring. So it was cool to see Josh Sweat get his, Dallas Goedert, Avonte Maddox, who made a big play in the Super Bowl on fourth down against Avonte Maddox, Jordan Mailata. I loved seeing those guys get one. Sad for Matt Pryor, he didn't get it. There's a reference, but I love seeing all those guys get it. And Josh Sweat is on this list. He wraps it up at number 10. He was quiet in 3 of the 4 playoff games, but when you have one of the best, most dominant Super Bowl performances that I've ever seen from a pass rusher, and you had a good argument to be the Super Bowl MVP, like if Jalen Hurts doesn't throw that touchdown to Devontae Smith, I think Josh Sweat probably wins MVP. So when you have a Super Bowl like that, how do I not put you on this list? When you're the main reason Pat Mahomes was running for his life and could not pull off the three-peat, you got to be on the list. So I had to put Josh Sweat at number 10. And it was tough. I was thinking about Milton Williams and Darius Slay, A.J. Brown, but when you have, 2 sacks, 2.5 sacks in the Super Bowl, 6 pressures, I mean, just endless pressures, getting to Mahomes, you got to be on the list. So I would put Josh Sweat at number 10. So there it is. There are your top 10 playoff performers of 2024. Jalen Hurts at number 1, Saquon Barkley number 2, Jalen Carter number 3, the entire offensive line at number 4, and Zach Bond at number 5. 6 through 10, number 6, Nolan Smith. 7, Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell. Number 8, Devontae Smith. Number 9, Dallas Goedert. And number 10, Josh Sweat. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. 4 more shows for you this week on the show, so thanks so much for being and everydayer. Louie DiBiase signing off. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.